The Ballot or the Bullet is a speech made by the American civil rights activist Malcolm X on April 3, 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio. In this speech, he speaks to America's African American community in an attempt to convince them to use politics to better their situation in America. He also warns them that if their political rights are continued to be oppressed by the white community, they may have to end up using violence in order to secure racial equality. Throughout Malcolm X's speech, he uses a variety of rhetorical strategies in order to convey his messages and convince his audience to follow him and his methods of fighting racism. Malcolm X's first rhetorical goal of his speech is to establish his credibility. He does this by conceding that he does have a major difference with the majority of his audience. He is a Muslim, while they are all Christian. He says, "Before we try and explain what is meant by the ballot or the bullet, I would like to clarify something concerning myself. I'm still a Muslim. My religion is still Islam. That's my personal belief. Just as Adam Clayton Powell is a Christian minister who heads the Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York, but at the same time takes part in the political struggles to try and bring about the rights to the black people in this country. And Dr. Martin Luther King is a Christian minister down in Atlanta, Georgia." After saying this, he refutes that this personal religious belief has any effect on his credibility in leading the black population out of oppression. He says, "Although I'm still a Muslim, I'm not here tonight to discuss my religion. I'm not here to try and change your religion. I'm not here to argue or discuss anything that we differ about, because it's time for us to submerge our differences and realize that it's best for us to first see that we have the same problem, a common problem, a problem that will make you catch hell whether you're a Baptist or a Methodist or a Muslim." By using this alternation between concession and refutation, he makes sure that his audience does not immediately discredit his beliefs because he's a Muslim. One of Malcolm X's other main points is that blacks have been betrayed by the Democrats, who claim to want to help the African Americans but don't have the political power to do so. He conveys this point by using an ad hominem attack on the Dixiecrats and the Democrats who remain in the political party dominated by Dixiecrats. He calls out how the Democrat Party makes false promises to African Americans in every election year, and then blames their inability to abide by these promises on the Dixiecrats. He says, "What alibi do they use, since their control in Congress and the Senate? What alibi do they use when you and I ask, 'Well, then you are going to keep your promise?' They blame the Dixiecrats. What is a Dixiecrat? A Democrat. A Dixiecrat is nothing but a Democrat in disguise. The titular head of the Democrats is also the head of the Dixiecrats, because the Dixiecrats are a part of the Democratic Party. The Democrats have never kicked the Dixiecrats out of the party. The Dixiecrats bolted themselves once, but the Democrats didn't put them out." As can be noticed by this quote, Malcolm X directly displays his contempt for the Democrat Party. In addition to an ad hominem approach, he also makes use of rhetorical questions in order to convince his audience to truly critically think about why they support the Democratic Party, even though this political party does nothing to help their situation. Also, he uses a technique of using the Dixiecrats' history against them when he alludes to the Civil War when they withdrew from the regular Democrat Party. Using this technique, he draws attention to the fact that the Democratic Party has the option of withdrawing from the Dixiecrats in order to fulfill their promises. Another rhetorical strategy which Malcolm X uses is establishing common ground. However, the way he does this is by isolating the black community from the rest of Americans. Because Malcolm X makes his audience feel as though other races in America will not help blacks, he draws his audience closer together because they feel as though they can only rely on each other. In fact, Malcolm X even goes as far as declaring that blacks are not Americans. He says, "I don't even consider myself an American. If you and I were Americans, there'd be no problem. Those honkies that just got off the boat, they're already Americans. Polacks are already Americans. The Italian refugees are already Americans. Everything that came out of Europe, every blue-eyed thing is already an American. And as long as you and I have been over here, we aren't Americans yet." Through this quote, it is clear that Malcolm X isolates the black community as something separate from Americans. Another reason that this method is so effective is that Malcolm X suggests that African Americans may have to turn to violence in order to gain their rights. If blacks saw themselves as countrymen with white Americans, they may find it difficult to turn to violence. However, by declaring that blacks are not Americans, he makes his audience feel like they are entitled to fight for their rights against those who oppress them. Malcolm X differs from many other political activists in the fact that he was not attempting to unite blacks with whites. In many instances in his speech, he uses language which clearly separates blacks from the whites. For instance, a major section of his speech talked about black nationalism. Black nationalism did not advocate for unification between blacks and white Americans, but instead it advocated for an end to black oppression, even if it ended up hurting others. Malcolm X also used terms such as cracker and honky, which would be considered as derogatory towards whites. Also, Malcolm X advocates for blacks to economically build up their own neighborhoods and parts of town instead of constantly supporting those of whites. While this is a good strategy, he still makes it clear that in his idealist future, there is still a black part of town and a white part of town. These techniques help blacks establish their own separate identity from whites and seek racial equality on Malcolm X's terms. Malcolm X makes superb use of rhetorical strategy in his speech in order to convey his idea of the ballot or the bullet. Although this speech thankfully did not represent the form of reform which America eventually used in the Civil Rights era, it did present a strong argument which influenced many African Americans to take action.